What's going on, y'all? I'm out here in the shop working on these Foxbodies. But before I get into anything, I want to just say, if you're watching this video or have watched any of my videos, I really do appreciate it. When you like a video, when you leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, it's greatly appreciated. If you would, just tell a friend about the channel. I would appreciate that as well. But in this episode, I'm going to be getting into how to diagnose a no spark, no start situation. And that's what's going on with the Foxbody behind me here. First thing that I check is to make sure that the rotor button is turning, because sometimes the distributor gear pin can shear off and your distributor is not turning. And if it's not turning, nothing else can work. But guys, as usual, I've rambled on way too long. I've yapped way too long. So let me shut up and let's diagnose this no spark, no start. There's a few tools that I like to have around when I'm trying to diagnose a situation like this. And I don't know the technical name for this first one. I've always called it a bump switch. You can actually hook this to your start solenoid, and you can either bump the engine over or you can crank it over. And that's going to come in real handy because we're needing to see if the rotor is spinning. So we'll be able to stand under the hood and watch the rotor. The second one is just a test light. The third tool here is a spark tester, and down here on the end, we've got a multimeter. I'll show you how I was taught to hook up the bump switch, and there's probably other ways you can do it, but once somebody shows you a certain way, you kind of just tend to stick with it. So I always disconnect the S wire, and then I put one lead on the right side and the other lead on the left side. I've got my bump switch hooked up, so let's see what we got. Okay, so the rotor is not spinning, and that's why I always check this first, because if that's not spinning, your pickup is not getting a signal, and therefore your TFI is not getting a signal, and the coil is never going to fire. Well, that was probably the easiest diagnosis that I have done in a long time. So the distributor gear pin has sheared off. So that distributor has to come out, and we'll put a new pin in it. And we're also going to check to see if the oil pump is locked up, because there's a few reasons why that pin will shear. I've seen it shear off in high horsepower applications. I've seen it shear off being over revved, and I've seen it shear off from the oil pump locking up. So when we get it out, we're definitely going to check to see if that oil pump is locked up. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to go ahead and pretend that the rotor spun just like it should. So we'll just continue on as if there was another issue. The next thing that I would have tested if the rotor would have turned would be the ignition switch, because I'm basically going to start where everything starts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what each circuit does, and then we'll test it. And then that way, hopefully it'll make more sense as we build each circuit together. So the first thing is the ignition switch. And what that does is when you put the key in the run position, it sends power to the positive side of the coil. So we're definitely going to check for power there. And that actually charges the coil and builds a magnetic field. But the ignition switch also sends power through this TFI harness to two different pins. And one is what they call the run power in pin, and the other is the coil negative pin. So I'll show you exactly where those pins are, because we're going to test for power there as well. We're going to need our test light to test these next three wires, and all you have to do is find a good ground, and basically anywhere metal on the car will work. And to test it, to make sure you got a good ground, just hit it to the hot side of your start solenoid, and you can see I've got a good ground there. So now I'm ready to test these hot wires. Also, the key has to be in the run position or none of this is going to work. So keep that in mind. So the first thing we're going to test is the hot side of the coil coming from the ignition switch. And we have power there, so that's good. Now we're going to go over and we're going to test these circuits on the TFI. And when you unplug this, guys, don't twist it or turn it, because if you do, the way I'm describing these to you is going to be upside down and backwards. So the other place they wanted to test is run power in, and that is going to be the 4th pin down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should have power, and we do. And the next place that we need to test is the tack or the coil negative, and that is the 5th pin down, and we're going to see if we got power, and we do. Now you might be wondering why we have power at the coil negative. And if you follow that wire back from where we just tested it, it is running right over to the negative side of the coil. And I'll go ahead and test it to show you there is power there. So you're probably like, why do we have power on the negative side? But here's the reason. This is not a true power wire. This is a signal wire. And I'll get into it a little bit more in the video. But what this does is when the TFI sends a signal over here, it is breaking the magnetic field that the positive side has created. And when it interrupts that magnetic field, that's what creates your spark. The last pin is an ignition ground, and I'm just going to test it just to make sure that we have good ground. So I'm going to move my test light over to the hot side of my start solenoid, and then I'm going to ground it to make sure that I've got good contact, and I do. So now we're going to test this ignition ground. So this light should come on if it's grounded. Now we're going to test the coil, and what the coil does is it converts low voltage to high voltage, and it does that. It's basically just some windings in there, but you have two sides. You have a low side, or what they call the primary side, which is your 12 volts, and then you have your secondary or high side, which is basically your spark. And we're going to test both sides, and I'm sure there's other ways to test it, but I found a couple ways that I thought were pretty good, and we're going to do that by using our ohm meter. And we're going to do the low side first. So I've got my ohm meter set to 200, and all we're going to do is we're going to connect one probe to each side of the terminal. And I don't know if this is necessary or not, but I'm going to put the red lead on the positive side and the black lead on the coil negative. And from everywhere I've read, this thing is supposed to ohm out from between 0.4 to 2 ohms. And you can see we are well within range. So we're good on the low side. Now we're going to switch over and check the high side. So we're going to move this to 20K ohms, because the range on this is from 2,000 to 15,000. And you can use either terminal, but I'm just going to use the positive side, and then you're going to connect to the post of where your coil wire would go. And you can see we're ohming out at right at about 9,000. So we're well within range. It's supposed to be 2,000 to 15,000, and we're right at 9,000. So that coil tested good. Let's talk about the distributor and the TFI now, because they work hand in hand. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out, but I also have an old distributor over here on the work table, and I'm going to show you all the parts inside the distributor. So hopefully it'll help us all understand how this works a little bit better. And I'll also show you what happened to this distributor. I've got two distributors here. This is the one that came out of the car. This is one out of a 302. This is for a 351. And they work identically. The difference is the diameter of the shaft. The 351 is bigger than the 302. But I'm going to use this 302 distributor to explain how a few things work, because I'm going to take it apart. I don't want to take his new distributor apart. So what happened with this one, and I've already knocked the old pin out, but you can see there's a hole that goes through that shaft, and there's a pin that goes through and it holds this gear on. There's holes in this gear as well. Well, this gear meshes with your camshaft. So when your camshaft is turning, the distributor shaft turns just like that, and everything works like it should. When this pin shears off, the only thing that happens is your gear is spinning on the shaft. And up here, nothing is happening. And that's why he had this no start, no spark. I went ahead and knocked the pin in off camera because that's pretty boring stuff. You just make sure the holes are lined up and you knock the pin in. And now you can see we have a working distributor again. One thing that I do like to do, if the pin is sticking out a little bit after you knock it in, I either like to cut it off or take a file and file it off. And the other thing we can't forget is to check to make sure that the oil pump is spinning freely. And I'm going to do that here in just a minute, but I want to show you guys how these distributors work. The first part of the distributor that I want to talk about is the shutter wheel, or what they call the reluctor. They're one and the same, and it's actually bolted to the top of the distributor shaft. I've unbolted this one so I can take it out. It's made of steel, and it's got what they call teeth cut in it. And what happens is, as the distributor shaft rotates, of course the shutter wheel is turning, and it works with the pickup in the distributor. Now the pickup is basically a magnet. It creates a magnetic field, and it sits real close to this shutter wheel. I mean, you can see it barely clears it. But what happens is, every time a tooth on this shutter wheel passes your pickup, it interrupts that magnetic field, and that creates a very small electrical current in the pickup coil. So you've got your pickup and you've got your pickup coil, and they are connected by wires in there. And if you look at on the bottom side of this pickup coil, you can see that's right where your TFI plugs in. And I actually have one right here, and I'm going to go ahead and plug it in, but we're going to talk about what these terminals do here in a little while, because we're going to test this TFI. Real quick, your shutter wheel is turning, and it's breaking the magnetic field caused by your pickup. And that creates a small signal in your pickup coil that goes into your TFI. Now your TFI sends that signal out to the ECU, and it uses that signal, the ECU, no matter if it's factory, aftermarket, Terminator X, whatever, it uses that signal that comes from the TFI to determine your crankshaft position. And as it processes that info, it sends a signal back into the TFI. And what that does, it's telling the TFI when to fire the coil. The way the TFI fires your coil and creates a spark is coming off the ignition negative side. And if we go back to when we were working on our ignition coil, if you remember, we had 12 volts in on the positive side, and that created our magnetic field in the coil. And then on the negative side, we actually had power. But what you have to remember, guys, is that's not primary power. That's just a signal wire. So what happens is, the wire that comes out of the TFI, it stops sending voltage, and it breaks that magnetic field. And when that happens, it sends your high current to the secondary side, and that creates your spark. I know that was a lot there, guys, but I just felt it was important to understand how your distributor works between your pickup coil, your TFI, and the signals that it sends to the ECU and the signals that it receives to fire the coil. But you can see I've broken out the multimeter, and I actually have some instructions on how to test the TFI module. So that's what we're about to do. I knew that distributor would come in handy for something. But before we start testing this, I'm gonna change the verbiage up on you guys a little bit, because it took me a minute to understand that the PIP, the pickup, Hall effect sensor is all the same thing. So now, instead of calling it a pickup, I'm going to call it PIP, just so we can get familiar with the verbiage. Now, the first thing we're going to test is the PIP in and the PIP out. And this first test, it should read less than 150 ohms. So I set my multimeter to 200. So the PIP in is this terminal right here. and the pip out is the top terminal right there. So all we're going to do is we're going to put one lead on each, and we're going to see what our reading is. And I'm at 100, and it should be less than 150, so that tested good. The second thing we're going to test is pip power, which is the middle terminal, and TFI power, which is also your run power in. And guys, I'm going to throw this different verbiage at you because I want you to understand this, because different people are going to use different verbiage. So I've got one lead on my pip power, and the run power in is the fourth terminal down from the top. And guys, you can see we've got nothing. Now I'm going to check to make sure that my multimeter's working, and it is. So that means we have a bad TFI. But guys, I got to be honest with you, I already knew it. But I've got a new one here. And this did not come off of his distributor. This is one that I had laying around. But I have a new one here. So we're going to do the same test. And we're going to go pip power, middle terminal. And then we're going to go run power in, fourth terminal down. And it should read less than 150 ohms. And there you go. About 87.5, 88. So it tested good. Okay, so this next reading should be less than 5. So we're going to leave our multimeter at 200. And the terminals we're going to be checking are the ground, which is the first terminal, and the ignition ground, which is the very bottom terminal. So let's see what we've got. And this is easier said than done. There we go, 1.1. The next thing we're going to test is the ground, which is the first terminal, and pip in, which is the third terminal. And I'm switching back and forth between these TFI modules, and it doesn't really matter. I'm just showing you how to test it. But this should read greater than 500, so we're going to switch to 20K on our multimeter. So ground is the first terminal, and pip in is the third terminal, and there you go. That's greater than 500. So that's good. The last thing we're going to check is pip power, which is the middle terminal, and pip in, which is the third terminal. And this should be between 900 and 15,000. So we're going to leave our multimeter on 20K ohms, and we're going to see what we've got. And we're good. That's reading 10,000. So that's between 900 and 15,000. So if your module fails any one of those tests, then you have a bad TFI. This is the part of the video where you're not going to like me very much, because we've tested every part of the ignition system at this point, and let's just say they've all tested good. The only thing left to test is the pickup coil. And if I get that far, I pretty much know that it's bad, but I don't replace pickup coils, and it's just a lot easier to buy a $100 distributor. So I'm not even going to get into how to test it, but I am going to show you my instructions on how to check your coil and your TFI module. I'll just show you real quick, and you can pause if you want to and write them down or however you want to do it. But I still have to check the oil pump to make sure that it's not locked up. The only thing you need to test your oil pump to see if it's locked up is a oil pump prime tool, and a 351 and a 302 are different because your oil pump drive is different diameters. It's bigger on a 351. And all we're gonna do is we're gonna run it down where the distributor goes, and you can kind of feel where it goes, and it's gonna fall right onto the shaft. Now, this should turn freely, so let's see what we got. Uh-oh. Well, now we've got bigger issues. This oil pump is locked up. So my easy fix has now gotten a lot more difficult. All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. And I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully now we all understand a little bit better about how our ignition system works on our Foxbody. And if we're having a no spark issue, we can get it diagnosed and get it fixed. But as you saw, I've got bigger issues now with the oil pump being locked up. So I got a lot of work ahead of me. Next episode, I'm not sure if I'm going to show the oil pump replacement, even though I do have a really neat contraption that makes changing an oil pump in a Foxbody a heck of a lot easier than probably what you're thinking it's gonna be. I've also got the 408, so be looking out for that video. But guys, as you can see, I'm busy, so I'm out.